So on June 16th, Trump met with his reactionary base in a Miami theater to announce his new policy reversing the Obama-era policies towards Cuba. And much like the Muslim ban, this policy is aimed at catering to a small right-wing minority that constitutes his base of power. Also like the Muslim ban, this policy has received criticism from both the bourgeoisie and the people, the working class. And I'm going to talk about all of the antagonisms in this talk. So as of right now, it's difficult to determine how this obvious political catering will impact Cuba-U.S. relations. What Trump issued was merely a policy that provides guidelines for regulations, but it's yet to be determined what these regulations actually will be and if any of them will actually pass into law. There's widespread contempt for the move, both from the bourgeoisie within the U.S., from the people here in the U.S., in the Cuban-American community, as well as the wider U.S. community, and also from Cuba, obviously. Its main support is the Gizanos, primarily in Miami, and their stooges in Washington, like Marco Rubio and Mario Diaz-Balart. Both of these senators, in fact, have already attempted to push several aspects of Trump's policy through Congress, and all of these efforts have failed, but they're trying to weasel it in to Trump's policy. One major aspect that Rubio and Diaz-Balart have pushed that Trump included in his policy, which had failed before, was to prohibit any sanctions with companies affiliated with the Cuban military. Now, at first, this may not seem like a big deal, it's just the military, but these Gizanos are smarter than that. They know how the Cuban economy is run and what sanctions will undermine it. The Revolutionary Armed Forces in Cuba is actually a major component of the Cuban economy, helping to administer almost all sectors of the economy, from housing and land to shipping, transit, construction, and banking. So a sanction against the military and all companies associated with it, which Trump proposes, would have a huge impact on the Cuban economy. In addition to this proposal, Trump's policy would also limit the exchange of agricultural goods, which even the U.S. agricultural sector is complaining will be a bad move for U.S. businesses. It will also prevent the free exchange of scientific research. The American Association for the Advancement of Science recently recalled the importance of the exchanges it's had with the Cuban Academy of Sciences over the last 2 years, noting that the countries share weather, waters, and diseases. So they're researching a lot of the same things, and it would benefit both of these groups if they could work together, as they should. In addition to this, Cuba has been leading the world in finding a cure for cancer, and the free exchange of this research will also be impacted. Under Obama, agreements were also reached between the U.S. and Cuba to work jointly on oil spills in the Florida Straits, help combat cybercrime, terrorism, and drug trafficking, reinforce the security of maritime navigation, and provide disaster relief. None of these agreements, it should be noted, were unilateral, which is to say, as Trump was claiming, they only benefited Cuba. Everything that I've just said would benefit both the U.S. and Cuba. At the same time, major corporations like Google and Marriott, which benefit from the travel industry, are attacking Trump's policies to reimpose the travel ban. In other words, Trump is isolated. Since this policy does not put any new regulations into effect on its own, which have to be approved by Congress, it's clear that the only thing Trump can do right now is continue to give empty gestures to his right-wing base. And I really have to emphasize how empty these gestures are. There actually were previous drafts of this policy proposal which had to be pared down because it was so unfavorable. He wanted to return to like Cold War type relations where the U.S. cuts off all diplomatic ties and puts Cuba on the U.S. government's list of state sponsors of terrorism. But those have been dropped because they're no one likes those, except for the Gizanos. Where's the rest of my speech? Yeah, it's on the back here. Okay. So Trump's base within the Cuban emigre community is dwindling, as Grandma noted in a recent article about this policy reversal. That's really important to note, that there's even dwindling support here in the U.S. for these kind of moves. Many people in the Cuban American community want to return to their country. They want to end travel restrictions, and they want to be reunited with family members back in Cuba. Trump, however, is not just receiving heat within the U.S. Cuba, too, will not step down in the face of this pressure. They've already asserted they will not be returning any civil rights leaders and freedom fighters that they've given asylum to, like Assata Shakur. And I just want to read a statement. I want to give the last word to the Cuban people. This is a quote from a recent statement by the revolutionary government of Cuba on these rollbacks. It says, "Any strategy aimed at changing the political, economic, and social system in Cuba, either through pressures and impositions or by using more subtle methods, shall be doomed to failure." Yeah. The changes that need to be made in Cuba, as those that have been made since 1959 and the ones that we are introducing now as part of the process to update our economic and social system, will continue to be sovereignty determined by the Cuban people. Just as we have been doing since the triumph of the revolution on January 1st, 1959, we will take on every risk and shall continue to advance steadfastly and confidently in the construction of a sovereign, independent, socialist, democratic, prosperous, and sustainable nation. Cuba sí, bloqueo no. That point about the diabetes cure is so crucial. I mean, basic issues are being solved in Cuba, and the U.S. is actively preventing them from coming into the States. And Cuba is like a public health for a lot of countries, as Sarah said. And, I remember when the police were brutalizing folks in Standing Rock, that the Cuban, did they actually send those doctors? I believe that they had a delegation ready to go out and help out. All of this would be reversed. So even activists on the ground here in the U.S., regardless of what your opinions of Cuba are, you can really benefit from ensuring that these kind of bans are not reversed. Now, as for China and Russia and their relation and how they have reacted to this policy proposal, from what I understand, China and Russia have both agreed to help Cuba out militarily. They've offered to help set up bases in the region to protect Cuba from any overt aggression. But in terms of the economy, Russia in particular has resumed its oil trade with Cuba. Obviously, Cuba is experiencing an energy crisis right now because its main trading partner, Venezuela, is under attack by the U.S. There was a 10-year halt that's been broken now. Russia is now trading again to give Cuba energy. And Russia apparently also forgave Cuba 90% of its debt that it owed to the Soviet Union. So kind of like an anti-austerity measure there. Cuba no longer has to include those in its national budget. And also, Russia, in terms of energy, has helped or offered Cuba to help build or help with oil exploration, I guess, so that it can become more self-sufficient. Obviously, as it experiences this energy crisis, it's critical that it has its own source. And then Russia's also offered to help build infrastructure projects. So, all things that will help Cuba, undoubtedly. Will it be implemented? I think, as I was trying to get at in my talk, that we need to be vigilant. Obviously, under Obama there was a thaw, but that doesn't mean that the U.S. isn't actively looking for ways, in which it can topple the Cuban Revolution. And I think they even, in the statement, they had said, sorry, I just want to get the language right, but I can't find my... Anyway, they said more subtle forms of aggression, right? This is in the Cuban statement. They know that there's overt ways of crushing the Cuban Revolution, but there's also these subtle ways, like how they're doing in Venezuela. It's an economic war. They're trying to undermine the economy so that popular support for the government diminishes, and then they can send in all of this money to fund a counter-revolution, right? That won't be stopped because there won't be any support against it. But will I think it'll be implemented? It seems unlikely. This seems like just a way for him to maintain connection to a base. But as I said, like Marco Rubio has been trying to push some of these aspects of the proposal through Congress, and it's been shut down. And then, as you saw with the Muslim ban, there was a lot of corporations who were against it, and that played a big role. Obviously popular pressure was there, but it's not good when major corporations like Google don't like you. So that's like a contradiction within the ruling class, obviously, that we should be aware of. But nevertheless, is something happening beyond us, or how do I put that? That's their issue. We got to focus on mobilizing the people, right? So anyway, that's all I got. Thank you.